Hi, I'm Larry Cohen, and I direct the Social Anxiety Help Clinic here in Washington, D.C. We're the D.C. Regional Clinic of the National Social Anxiety Center, NSAC, which we co-founded several years ago, and which has many regional clinics scattered around the country. This video is an orientation to doing cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, specifically for social anxiety. Now, we help people with a wide variety of other problems in addition to social anxiety here at my clinic, but this video is specifically about using CBT to overcome social anxiety. Many outcome studies have demonstrated that CBT is the most effective treatment for most people in learning to overcome their social anxiety. I've been doing this work for more than 30 years. I've worked with more than 1,000 individuals and have led more than 90 20-week social anxiety CBT groups in my practice. I also have my own history of social anxiety in my youth, which I learned how to overcome using CBT, so I feel like I get it. I'm going to describe both group CBT for social anxiety as well as individual CBT because we provide both formats here and they each have their different strengths and limitations. I'll start by describing group, and we'll also let you know how it's similar and different than individual in various ways. First of all, the social anxiety CBT groups are really quite different than the type of therapy groups that you probably are thinking of. Most traditional therapy groups are primarily discussion groups or support groups. In the CBT groups that I run, there is certainly plenty of discussion and support in every single session, but the principal activity in my groups is actually learning skills, techniques, and strategies of how to overcome your social anxiety, practicing those skills and techniques and strategies in session and in out-of-session homework as well. So these are learning groups, and as a result, many people think of them as classes, although unlike school classes, my CBT groups are highly personal, help you work on overcoming personal problems and achieve personal growth. And of course, unlike class and school, there's no grading or evaluation, of course, in my CBT groups. Like a school class, however, there is homework. And I want to describe the homework first because in CBT for social anxiety, actually both in group and individual, the homework is the core of the therapy around which everything else revolves. The homework falls into two broad categories, written and behavioral. The written homework is usually in the form of various worksheets. There's quite a variety of worksheets that I distribute at different points for different specific purposes, but for the most part they're intended to help you identify, challenge, and change the thinking, the behavior, the feelings, the underlying beliefs that contribute to your social anxiety. The worksheets take up to an hour a week to complete. Sometimes it's a little bit every day, and it's very important. In addition to the worksheets, there's behavioral homework. Some of that homework, especially early on in therapy, is in the form of practicing some basic skills that are necessary to master to help you overcome social anxiety and other problems as well. One of the most important of these skills is mindfulness and thought diffusion. Mindfulness and thought diffusion means getting out of your head and into the moment. In other words, learning how to focus with interest, with curiosity, rather than with self-judgment on the conversation, the persons, the activity that we're engaged with, and how to disconnect from the thoughts and feelings that are causing us problems, how to treat them like background noise that we're aware of but not attending to. It's a simple concept, but it takes daily practice to get quite good at it, and that's one of the types of homework that you'll be beginning with. There's other skill practice as well. The major part of the behavioral homework is doing what I call experiments. These are sometimes called exposures. I prefer the word experiments because they are meant primarily as learning experiences. We are experimenting by changing some of the way we think and some of the way we behave in situations in which we normally feel anxiety, and seeing to what degree that can help lessen our anxiety, build self-confidence, and have more effective, more enjoyable interactions with people. You choose your own experiments according to the goals you want to work on. Everyone has the same general overarching goal of learning to overcome your social anxiety and to build self-confidence, but each person chooses early on individual goals or personal priorities that they want to focus on in their treatment, whether in group or an individual CBT. Depending on the person, your goals might include making friends, dating, forming intimate relationships, socializing, pursuing your career, speaking up at meetings, giving presentations, being more assertive, using public bathrooms, being sexual, stage performing. There's just a whole variety of social anxiety-related goals that you might choose from depending on your personal life priorities. And those goals help you come up with ideas for behavioral experiments to engage in as homework on a given week. I will also give you a list of a great many experiment ideas, and in group you will get ideas from other group members of what experiments they're doing. In fact, in group, you have the option of doing some of your experiments, not all, but some of your experiments with other group members. So for example, let's say you choose to go to some social activity, perhaps a meetup, in order to work on talking to new people, and perhaps on the goal of making friends or even dating. You might want to start out by doing that with another group member, making sure that you each encourage each other and support each other in going out and talking with strangers. You choose your own experiments, and you choose them hierarchically, meaning you don't start with the hardest, scariest things at first, unless you absolutely have to because maybe it's a work requirement on your job. But ideally, you choose your experiments in incremental steps, gradually working your way up to harder ones only as you build more confidence with the ones that were less scary in the first place. You don't just throw yourself into the experiment, by the way. You will do certain worksheets before and after the experiment so that you come into the experiment with a different way of thinking and a different way of behaving, and you can learn from every experiment. In fact, I stress that no matter how the experiment goes, every experiment, without exception, is a learning experience. Most experiments go better than we think they will, but sometimes not so much. However, even in those cases, even when the experiment was in some ways disappointing, there are constructive things we can learn from the experiment, and that's one of the most important things you learn in CBT, whether in group or individual, for social anxiety, is how to learn from experiments and how to learn from other life experiences as well, so that you could help make further progress toward your personal goals. In addition to individual experiments, there's the option of doing some group experiments. For example, every few weeks or so in group, we have a social to which everyone is invited, in which individual group members organize if they volunteer. Some of these socials are quite simple, like hanging out in a coffee shop together to have discussion with each other and perhaps to chat with a barista or other strangers at the coffee shop as well. Other of the group socials involve activities such as bowling or museums or going to the zoo or going to shopping malls or going to festivals. Depending on the time of year, there's a great variety of things that might happen in these optional group socials. As I mentioned earlier, you also have the option of doing some of your homework experiments with other group members. And finally, one other unique feature of the group is that you will have a homework buddy, another group member who is paired with you for each week. You'll be rotating buddies so that you will be buddies with everyone in the group for a couple of weeks each. And a homework buddy has an old-fashioned phone call with each other every week to talk about your experiences and feelings with the homework so that you get more out of it and so that you encourage and support each other in the homework. Now I want to describe what goes on in group session. First of all, part of what happens in group session, individual session as well, is that we learn and practice various skills and strategies that you will later be practicing in homework experiments. In group, however, you have the opportunity to practice these skills and strategies with 6 or 7 or 8 other group members, whereas an individual, you only get to practice them with me. And so that's one of the advantages of group, is being able to practice with and learn from a variety of other group members, as well as to receive their support and provide your support for them. The in-group practice, I call in-group experiments, happens in a variety of ways. Some of these are experiments that I choose. So for example, in the very first few sessions, we'll be pairing up and mingling with each other as though it were a party or a meetup, so that you can practice mingling in pairs later in small groups, so that you can do the same sort of thing in your own experiments as homework if those are the experiments you choose. We do other kinds of exercises in group, like sharing compliments, telling stories, making mistakes or doing embarrassing things on purpose as a way to learn that these are not such a big deal and we can overcome them quickly. We do quite a variety of in-group experiments. Many of the in-group experiments we do are things that you choose for yourself when it's your turn. So depending on your goals, you might choose to practice giving a speech at work or at your 12-step group or at church or something like that, and we could practice that in group. Or you might choose to practice starting conversation with individual strangers at a social event, or maybe in a public location like a grocery store or a bookstore. Or you might practice asserting yourself with somebody with whom you disagree, or practice asking people out socially or on dates, or turning people down who've asked you out that you're not interested in seeing. There's a whole variety of things that we can practice depending on what your goals and priorities are. And one of the advantages in group is not only being able to practice with other group members, but you're also able to get feedback from other group members and see how you come across. Whereas an individual, you only get the feedback from me. And finally, you have the option, I don't want to scare you away, it's only an option, but many people choose to partake, at least occasionally, of having your in-session practice video recorded so you can see for yourself how you come across, which is usually much better than we predicted. And even when it isn't, it still identifies specific behavioral things that we might want to work on changing. The last thing I want to say about what goes on in group, which is really quite unique, is that we have field trips. The group is 5 months long. In the middle 3 months, instead of two of the regular sessions, we have a all-day 6-hour plus lunch break session on a Saturday in some sort of public location. Depending on the time of year and the weather, we might go to the National Mall where we can be outdoors or pop in and out of various free museums. We might go to DuPont Circle where if the weather is good, there's usually lots of people hanging out, or the National Zoo if the weather is warm enough and good. We might go to shopping malls or to Union Station or to other locations where there are strangers, and we meet usually in a coffee shop. We divide up into pairs for 1-hour rotations, and we practice working on specific goals in talking to strangers. You choose your own goals. You get to rotate whom you're working with as a partner, so you get different experience with different people. And in between, we meet to talk about what you can learn from that experience. We sometimes have a party with former group members as well, in which you get to practice talking with people who used to be in group and who are strangers to you. So there's a variety of field trips and in-group experiments that we do in group, which are much, much more limited. Some of them happen, but they're much more limited in individual CBT. In individual CBT, one of the main differences is in the commitment. Group is 20 weeks long. If you join the group, you must make, there are no exceptions, a commitment to the whole 20-week program. If you do not wish to make that commitment or do not feel that you can make that commitment, I fully respect that, but you may not join the group because it's disruptive to have people drop out of group. I try to limit that as much as possible, and typically that happens only rarely. So if you don't feel you can or want to make that commitment, individual is the right option because the commitment for individual therapy is one session at a time. You simply need to give us 24 hours notice to cancel a session, and you can stop individual CBT at any point that you find it useful. There's also more flexibility in scheduling. Group has a set schedule, which you will be given on paper. Individual, you set your own session with me or with my associate. Typically, individual begins weekly and then goes to every other week as you've started making substantial progress. And then when you feel ready, it either ends completely or you move into more infrequent sessions, such as once every several weeks or on an as-needed basis. Whereas in group, you need to follow the set schedule. Another big difference between group and individual CBT is you get much, much, much more individualized attention in individual therapy. The sessions are only an hour compared to the 2.5 or 3 hours that groups are. But in groups, you have between 6 and 9 members, whereas in individual, it's just you and I. And so you get much more individualized attention, which for some people is really important. Why might that be important for you? Well, there's two kinds of reasons. One, you may need much more individualized attention if, in addition to social anxiety, you have at least one other acute problem. Now, we all have other problems, but I'm talking about acute problems that can't be left aside for several months while you're focusing on your social anxiety. The most common examples of possible acute problems are severe depression, severe enough that it's debilitating to you, prevents you from functioning in at least one key area of life. It could be an acute drinking problem, eating disorder problem. It could be a situational crisis going on in your life that needs attention. If you're experiencing any of those things, group is not the right choice for you at this time. I would start out an individual, and then if you wish, you can join a group later once that acute problem is at least largely taken care of. There's another reason why you might need more individualized attention, is that maybe you need more guidance in doing the work. Some people are strong self-starters. You give them something to work on, and they come back a week later and having done their best and worked on it, maybe they didn't do a perfect job, but they did make their efforts and they learned from it. Well, that's not true of everyone. Some people need more guidance. There's no shame in that. That's just a different personality. It's just a different approach. If that's you, if you tend not to follow through on homework assignments, even the ones that you've chosen for yourself, and remember, the behavioral homework you choose for yourself. If knowing yourself, you're someone that tends not to follow through on that, individual is a much better choice for you because you can get much more attention on motivation, on how to help you follow through on the homework, on doing some of that homework in session to make it easier to then do it on your own later. You can get much more help in individual on this than you would in group. The actual therapy is essentially the same, CBT, in individual and in group. You have the same type of homework and the same skills, strategies, and techniques you're learning in individual that you did in group. But again, in individual, you don't have other group members to learn from, to get support from, or to support, or to practice with, whereas in individual, you just have me, which for some people is ideal, for others it's limiting. Some people are tempted to choose group over individual simply because they see it as less expensive. And while I understand that, that isn't necessarily true. Think about it. The per session cost for group is indeed much less than the per session cost for individual, but do remember with individual, it is a one session at a time commitment. With group, you sign up, you are committed financially to all 20 weeks, even if you leave group early, which is rarely happens, but does, you are committed to pay for the rest of the group sessions. Why? Because you're still taking a spot in the group that no one else can join, not after the first session. Individual, that's not the case. You can leave whenever you're ready in individual. In group, it's a 20-week commitment, so it's not necessarily cheaper or more expensive. It depends on your individual needs, which we can discuss in session. These are the basics of group and individual CBT for social anxiety. I want to stress one more thing. Over the 30 plus years I have been doing this, I have seen people make a great deal of progress. It is really quite moving. And if you want to get a sense of that, there's a section on my website called Personal Change Stories, where you'll see a number of essays and audio recordings and a few video recordings of former clients of mine, most of them former group members, as well as some former individual clients of mine, who wrote their stories or recorded their stories as inspiration for others who are considering doing CBT for social anxiety. And I've seen people really turn their lives around. I've also seen people make more moderate progress, and sadly, a few people, this is infrequent, but it does happen, make very little progress. How much progress you make in CBT in general, including CBT for social anxiety, is dependent on a number of things, but above all, it's dependent on how much homework you do. This is true whether you do individual or group CBT. How much homework you do and how frequently you do it predicts more than anything else how much progress you make and how rapidly you make that progress. Now, it doesn't take a great deal of courage. In fact, I like to say that this therapy takes a little bit of courage, but a whole lot of perseverance. A little bit of courage because you need to face your fears to learn how to overcome them. There's no other way to do it than that. That's called exposure therapy. But a little bit of courage because it's ideal to face your fears in small steps that feel manageable to you. But if you only take an occasional baby step, you're not going to get anywhere. You need to take frequent small steps and occasional bigger steps, and that will help you make a great deal of progress. Thank you for listening, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any further questions or concerns.